Okay, everyone. We have a slight delay, but we are ready to start now. So I would like to welcome you to this event today that I have the pleasure of having organized with my dear colleague Barbara Bonte. And once again, we are here to talk about the WHO. I have had several events covering what they're trying to do and have been able to do actually in certain instances. You might remember they tried to change the treaties, pretty much granting the WHO governing powers in case there was a new pandemic, which incidentally they kind of called out the pandemic and then would seize governing powers of the member states of the WHO. This coup d'etat failed because the treaty did not come to pass. So they chose a different path. They chose to change the international health regulations, and everything they wanted to do in that proposed treaty change, they kind of snuck in there. And here we are. So I'm really happy that once again, my friend pretty much at this point, Philipp Kruse once again is here. We go back quite several years now, and it all started out during the so-called Corona pandemic, and we've covered lots of stuff ever since then. So, let's just hear where we are in terms of the WHO and what we can do, if anything, at that point. But, you know, there's always an alternative. What we can do to stop the WHO, to pretty much regulate our private lives and mandate such things as when we can leave the house, or, you know, if we have to go into a lockdown or take an mRNA injection or whatever it is they dream up next. So I'm pleased to have you all here, and I'm very curious to find out what the state of play is as far as the WHO is concerned. But before we get into that, I would ask my colleague Barbara to also say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you everyone for being here. As you all know, on the 22nd of January this year, the United States formally walked out of the World Health Organization, and the reflex in this town in Brussels has been remarkably uniform. A sigh, a shrug, and a quick return to business as usual. And this reflex is dangerous because whether you like the messenger or not, the message is real and they are pretending it is not. I always will remember one moment, one tweet from the World Health Organization, the 14th of January 2020. I quote, "Preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China." Possibly the most catastrophic tweet in modern public health. Because here is what we know now. On that very same day, the WHO's own technical lead was internally warning about super-spreading events. And on the very same day, according to documents obtained by the Associated Press, Chinese authorities already knew the virus transmitted between humans, but waited another 6 days to tell their own population. And on that very same day, the World Health Organization chose to broadcast Beijing's reassurance rather than its own scientists' alarm. And it was not that the WHO didn't know. It chose whom to believe. And it chose Beijing over its own experts. And 2 months would pass between that tweet and between the declaration of a pandemic. 2 months in which Europe could have prepared and avoided lockdowns, massive deaths, and awkward measures. 2 months in which my country, Belgium, could have stockpiled, screened, protected its elderly people in care homes, and many of whom would die alone behind glass because of decisions made in those weeks. We did not prepare, and that's partly because the world's highest health authority told us we did not need to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just the most visible failure. When we look how this organization is actually funded, roughly 3/4 of the WHO's budget comes from voluntary earmarked donations, money where the donor dictates exactly what it must be spent on. And the United States was the largest funder at 15%, and the second largest is even not a country. It is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at 14%, at Gavi, which is itself Gates-funded, and a single private actor wields more influence over WHO priorities than most of its 194 member states combined. And this comes from the WHO's own published budget data. And then look at the institution itself, 8,000 staff, a bureaucracy, like your European Union, whose own workers were credibly accused of sexual exploitation and abuse of vulnerable women during the Ebola response in the Democratic Republic of Congo, an organization criticized by independent reviewers for being slow on Ebola, slow on COVID, and unable to learn between the two, an organization that still defines health in 1948 language as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, a standard so unattainable that, frankly, none of us in this room qualifies as healthy. And yet, this is the organization we keep funding, without asking questions, without conditions, without consequences. And just last week, my country, Belgium, once again confirmed voluntary financial contributions to the WHO without a single serious parliamentary debate about whether that money produces results, without asking what was achieved, without asking what was reformed, without asking whether the failures of 2020 have led to any structural change inside this organization. And that is, according to me, an insult to every taxpayer who is right now told that their healthcare, their pension, their energy bills must be tightened because budgets are tight. And budgets are not tight when it's come to multilateral institutions that fail. We see this every day in this institution too. Budgets are only tight when it comes to citizens. We hand over millions every year to an organization whose track record on the last pandemic was deceived by omission, whose financing structure is captured, whose governance is opaque, whose leadership has not been held accountable for any of it. And we call this responsibility. It is clearly not. And that is why I'm very glad that this conference is being organized, because we need this debate. We need scrutiny. We need the courage to ask difficult questions about institutions that have for too long been protected by the assumption that questioning them is somehow unserious or extreme. It is not extreme. It's our job to do it. The WHO will not reform itself and will certainly not reform as long as Europe keeps paying without asking. That has to stop.
I would turn it over now to Maria to introduce the guests. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in such a high number in the room. Thank you for joining us via the live stream to our WHO Unmask event today. I will also do a keynote speech later this afternoon, but it's a great pleasure for me now to let our legal experts speak. And first is Philip Kruse, and I am honored that I can call him a friend and that I can introduce him to you now. But first of all, I want to say thank you to the ESN group. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to you, Christine. Always when we have ideas, and you always have an open ear for us, always have an open heart for us, and thank you so much that you are such a strong partner in organizing such important events. And also thank you to the Patriots Group, who sent you as a representative and MEP that also is here to take a strong stand, and you had a wonderful speech, and that is really it. Thank you for pointing all that out. Okay, Philip Kruse is a Swiss attorney at law with his own law firm in Zurich. Philip is specialized in tax and finance law, as well as on regulatory matters in the health sector. Between 2021 and 2025, Philip has led many court proceedings for over 100 individuals, including medical practitioners, restaurant owners, students, and school children against unconstitutional COVID-19 mandates. In July 2022, he has submitted a substantial criminal complaint against Swissmedic, the Swiss Medical Safety Agency, for violating all applicable regulatory rules and standards when providing the market authorization for the COVID-19 vaccines. This case was initiated by 6 individuals suffering from heavy mRNA side effects. It is still pending. Philip does also represent a number of pilots and flight attendants in several Swiss courts in a labor law matter against an international airline, which imposed the duty to get vaccinated on its entire flight personnel. Since 2022, Philip has done a lot to inform the public about the risk from mRNA-based injections and about the WHO, in particular about the international health regulations and the pandemic treaty. He was invited to provide his expert opinion on the WHO matter in the Health Committee of the German Bundestag and the Knesset. Members of parliament from many different countries have invited him to speak about the WHO. Now he speaks in the EU Parliament for the 6th time. Please welcome with me Philip Kruse, attorney at law from Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this kind introduction. And thank you very much to MEP Anderson and MEP Bronte for hosting this important event, which is so important for inform the public. And of course, most notably, thank you very much for the participants to this event who have made considerable ways to join us here, some of them even from the United States. Welcome and thank you for coming. Now, thank you very much. Yes. So please, we start with the presentation. So my main topic today will be to outlay the situation not only for the citizens, but also for the lawmakers who are willing to take on this topic and to provide them some insight what to do and how to start an investigation against WHO. Because this is the thing that must be done first before we enter into further international agreements with this so-called health organization. I first provide the basis of understanding for those who might not be fully aware about what is going on. So what is the key issue here? We have at center the International Health Organization that was founded in 1948 on the basis of a very notable own constitution, which lays out the purpose of this organization very clearly. And the objective of this organization is the attainment by all people of the highest possible level of health. And this, of course, includes the duty to avoid all measures, all communication, and all steps that could jeopardize people's health. During COVID-19, WHO acted upon its most important legal basis in times of emergencies, and these are the international health regulations enacted in 2007 that were adopted recently in June 2024 and which are now in force in the amended version since last year, September 2025. These amendments are in force. Not in force yet and not even signed is this second important legal basis that we have often spoken about already here, which is the pandemic treaty. The huge part of it has been adopted by the World Health Assembly in the, please, can you go to slide number 6? Slide number 6. has been adopted by the World Health Assembly last year in May 2025, but it is not yet available for signature because one important key element is missing and is still about to be negotiated, and this is the part regarding Article 12, regarding the pathogen access benefit sharing concept, of which I will speak later during my presentation. So this is still in negotiation. It can still be declined, and even after its potential signing, there are still 18 months for every country to reject it in the process of ratification domestically. These two agreements are intertwined. They have far-reaching overlapping concepts. Some of them are displayed. Please, next slide. Here on this slide. They share this basic dogma, this vaccination dogma. They share the idea of infodemics, which is the information control done and exercised by WHO. They are based on the emergency paradigm, which means that WHO, once it has declared a public health emergency of international concern, that will trigger all kinds of legal consequences internationally and for the member states, and so on. Most notably, there is this concept of all of government, all of society approach, meaning that all measures, all information, all concepts that are proposed by the WHO shall be taken over and applied by the governments and all of their branches. This is by definition, by nature, a very totalitarian concept. Or you could also say it's a wartime concept that can be justified only in times of war. Next slide. Also, at the beginning of this topic, we should mention that although we steer with tremendous energy towards the conclusion of the pandemic treaty, there have been internationally significant criticism about WHO. The United States have affected already their exit. The same applies to Argentina, and Israel is about to speak about it, to discuss it in the parliament. But also, what we can take note of is that within the United States there have been two parliamentary investigation committees that have carefully analyzed the actions of the WHO. And these investigation reports can serve as a very good role model for all those members of parliament who want to initiate the same initiative in their parliament. Here you see the Select Committee's final report, which was released on 4th December 2024, and its critics on WHO could not be clearer. It says that the WHO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic was an abject failure. The organization failed to satisfy all of the above stated goals, like prepare for emergency by identifying, mitigating, and managing risks. They to prevent emergencies and to support development of tools and to detect and respond to acute health emergencies. When looking further into these reports, we find a lot of witness statements and of evidence that are very clear that from the scientific side, literally, WHO has failed in all aspects when managing this pandemic. But still today, the General Director of the WHO, Tedros Ghebreyesus, maintains the dogma that the vaccine was the only valuable solution to prevent further harm from happening and to protect the people. And he goes even as far to say that we have sufficient evidence on WHO's side that they work. And he says, I quote, "I think it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. I think they use COVID as an opportunity, and you know all the havoc they are creating." So there's no insight whatsoever on the side of WHO that one should reassess the basics of this pandemic. Now, please go to slide number 11. 12 now. Now, why should we still bother? Why can't we say it is behind us? Why can't we say, let's forget about it? Those own numbers, page 13. WHO on their homepage, they declare that there were 15 million excess deaths associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Interestingly, they don't say what the reason was for the death, whether it was truly the virus or whether they were the results of the mandates, maybe even of the vaccines. But nobody actually would ever think for a second if after an airplane crash with 229 people dying, we would need to find out why did these people have to die, how could it have been prevented, was there gross negligence involved, what must be done to prevent this from happening, and are there any accountabilities on the side of the involved people? This is an absolute normal behavior that we have seen last time tragically in Switzerland on the 1st of January with this very tragic accident in a disco where 41 young people died and where all the efforts as of this day were put into solving these normal questions. We are talking about necessary standards that ultimately are an example of good governance, of quality control, of risk management, of doing a proper after-action review. Now, what rules can we apply here to hold WHO accountable? What are the objective standards that we can apply? Please go to slide 16. Let's start with WHO's own constitution, Article 1. WHO's objective is the attainment, as we have heard, by all peoples of the highest possible level of health. Article 2, WHO has the duty to coordinate its normative, advisory, and technical support functions. Article 37, WHO staff are responsible only to the organization and must not accept external instructions. This is an important detail and must be audited carefully by all member states, because even on WHO's own homepage, we see that 87% of voluntary contributions in the pandemic years 2022 until 2023 were earmarked, were voluntary contributions designed for specific purposes defined by the sponsors. And that creates a structural risk that funding may influence operational priorities of WHO to the benefit of the sponsors. Then further, next slide please, we have a number of objective, internationally acknowledged rules regarding fundamental rights. WHO is part of the United Nations system, has to operate within the broader framework of international cooperation and human rights. In particular, there's a provision in Article 3 International Health Regulations which clearly binds WHO to respect all human rights. And the next slide, I just want to indicate that the demand for doing an after-action review and to do a proper reassessment is not something that comes out of an impulse, spontaneous impulse without any logic behind it. There are substantial WHO internal rules that oblige WHO itself to submit their actions under COVID-19 to the strictest scrutiny. And of course, there are more of these rules and standards of quality control, of risk assessment, even internationally. Please go briefly through the next slides, which will serve every committee of a lawmaker's investigation process to design and properly set up an investigation. Now, which key topics to examine? Page 22. What are the key questions? If we sit down, if we take all of these provisions that I have just summarized very quickly, what would be the key questions that we as lawmakers or as representatives of the people would have to find an answer for before we can enter into new obligations with WHO? Now, of course, number one question is, did WHO do a correct risk assessment regarding SARS-CoV-2, regarding the true effect of it? Or did WHO declare and extend a fake public health emergency of international concern for no reason? Number two, did WHO investigate the origins of this pandemic accurately enough, including the possibility of a laboratory origin? Without knowing the origin, we will never be able to prevent a similar event from happening. Number three, did WHO correctly assess the risk from these new substances, these modRNA substances, accurately? We're talking here about a new method, a new production method, even a new production method that was inserted after the official authorization process. And we're talking here about gene therapies that were declared in the regulatory field to be not harmful only by a legal fiction, but without truly addressing the true risks that are associated with gene therapy. And of course, all the empirical data that popped up after the authorization so far, the question is, did WHO ever consider these data in its action? Number four, did this organization communicate clearly and accurately and honestly about all of these points to the people? Next slide, number five. Did WHO allow open scientific debate and fair consideration of different views? Did WHO respect human rights and the principle of proportionality? In particular, can we say that never ever a person was forced or driven into an experimental treatment without its consent? Number seven, did WHO remain independent from its donors and sponsors? Number eight, did WHO respect and safeguard all well-established safety rules, safety standards for the applicable, for the recommended countermeasures? And number nine, did WHO's internal oversight, its internal audit and control systems work properly, yes or no? So this is a first set of 9 questions that by definition should be responded by WHO itself, and which to a huge extent have been examined by the investigative committee of the Senate and the investigative committee of the House of Representatives in the United States. And I can only recommend to review these reports because they are an excellent example of how checks and balances should work, and we can take a lot of evidence from these 2 reports. So what can we say if we go through? And of course, for us here in this room and for many who watch us, these questions are not new at all. To the first question, Slide number 26. Did WHO did a proper risk assessment before declaring a worldwide global public health emergency of international concern, a concept that was, of course, pre-existing. Abbreviation FAKE. This matters extremely because this declaration triggers a whole set of consequences of very wide range for every democracy. This declaration was based on the PCR tests that were declared to have the highest diagnostic accuracy. And we have to observe and to state that as a consequence of this declaration, 194 governments have applied emergency powers, here in Europe at least, all of them with never seen before energy and effects. We have never before seen massive violation of basic fundamental rights. We have, as a lawyer, we had to see that never was any court be willing. Please, slide number. Next slide, please. Also the next. Yes. Never was a court willing to reconsider the facts independently as this should have been done within a democracy with working checks and balances. Still today, I don't know of any judgment in Switzerland where the true nature of this COVID-19 pathogen was ever assessed accurately. Then also, and this is the lower part here on the slide, we do have emergency use authorizations. And this is, in my view, the most dangerous aspect of everything. When looking into the authorization papers, when looking on the justification that we are given as a people, why these authorizations were given, then the declaration, WHO's declaration of an emergency plays the #1 crucial role. Without such a declaration, we would never have had an emergency use authorization from the United States, never had a conditional authorization within Europe, and in Switzerland never had a similar authorization. And the same applies to the procurement agreements, to the purchase agreements of the many countries who have purchased these mRNA substances. Just on mid-April, 16th of April in Switzerland, the Federal Office of Health was obliged to openly publish the full text of the procurement agreement. And what we found there was a full confirmation of what we had assumed to find based on the already unofficially published procurement agreements, which is a total asymmetry and total one-sided repartition of duties. We see that governments have paid astronomous amounts of money for what? The governments did not in return get any warranty about quality, warranty about efficacy, about safety, and even our Swiss government explicitly renounced to make any claim in case these substances would turn out to be totally useless. These procurement agreements were justified to be designed like that for the sole simple reason because there was a pandemic. And as a last important point, for the consequences out of this simple declaration that was provided by the secretary, the general secretary, we see the concept of total control of information. Total control of information under the title of infodemics. We have seen that whatever was put out under the title of the WHO needs to be readjusted. Most of it was blatantly wrong, whether it was about the WHO assessment of the danger of the virus, which was overdone, or whether it was about the efficacy and the safety of the vaccines. So this is an important topic. Will it be better in the future? Will WHO be restricted in terms of declaring a public health emergency of international concern? No. We see that already in the amended international health regulations, where in the annex additional facts can give rise to such a declaration. And we also see that in the concept of the global genomic surveillance strategy, where by way of maximum testing even of not only humans, but also the world of the animals and of the sewage water, all kinds of potential pathogens can give rise of another pandemic. Next slide. Yes, so that was the Annex 1 of the International Health Regulations. Okay, now the next topic will be, please, slide number 32. Did WHO investigate the true origins of the pandemic accurately enough? And we see on the next slide that WHO, in its joint report of February 2021, clearly dismissed, clearly excluded this theory of a lab leak. And comparing the different scenarios, it came to the conclusion that the introduction of the virus through a laboratory incident was considered by this investigation report team to be an extremely unlikely pathway. Thereby, WHO ignored many facts that happened before, and since then we have seen much evidence that states that clearly points at a lab origin. This is not here the moment to provide scientific evidence, but just to remind you that we have the information from most of the United States secret services, the German Secret Service and the English Secret Service, and then a number of international scientists who have clearly stated, under oath even, that such a phenomenon like an SARS-CoV-2 virus with cleavage site and other specialties would never pop up in nature just like that. Still, please, slide 41. In another report published in June 2024, WHO maintains its position and declared that the origins of SARS-CoV-2 and how it entered the human population will remain inconclusive. And the reasoning they give is, they say, we do not get access to the information at the laboratory in Wuhan. Therefore, we cannot point at any laboratory spillover. What does this mean if we ignore the fact that the highest risk, the highest probability for SARS-CoV-2 and the explanation for it was the lab risk? If we ignore that, well, please go to slide number 42. In the pandemic treaty, in Article 12, there is a provision under the title of pathogen access benefit sharing that I mentioned already, and that needs to be completed through the negotiations to an annex. Luckily, the negotiations have not yet come to an end as it was planned by the WHO. There will be other rounds, but it can any time from now come to an end. what is the purpose of this concept? As the title says, it is a concept whereby pathogens must be shared by all member states who find a pathogen with pathogenic potential. It must be shared on an international platform where it is made available to all the other participating countries. That in itself creates a risk, because if you are aware of a virus, a pathogen that is available on an international platform where 194 member countries have access to, there's always the risk associated of a further spreading of this virus. And it not only is a platform for member countries to analyze this information, but it is also available to producers of vaccines. By paying a little amount to the WHO, any producer of vaccines will be entitled to get the information that is defining for a pathogen loaded up to this platform. And we are talking here about pathogens with potential military danger. It can be just like that, taken by the producers and used for them to produce a vaccine. And here we see there are always two sides of it. You can sell this story as an idea, a good idea to protect people, but of course it is open to abuse. Abuse for the purpose of business, making huge business. So, and thirdly, it must be stated that if we ignore the likelihood of pathogen SARS-CoV-2 being created in a laboratory, if we ignore that, then we miss the entire point. Then we miss preventing this from happening again. Only by acknowledging the fact that it was most likely created in a laboratory can we prevent this from happening again, and can we increase the safety standards, and in particular the conventions that have so far been concluded, but they are not really effective when it comes to the protection against gain of function and creating of bioweapons. So it is, and one last remark to this topic, please, 64. Coming from Switzerland, 64, I should mention that, no, sorry, 44, I was with the wrong, thank you. Coming from Switzerland, I should mention that there is a laboratory in Switzerland, in Spiez, Biolab, security level 4. It exists already for many decades, and it is the designed official laboratory for this exactly very purpose, to serve as a platform for pathogen access benefit sharing. And there was already a test trial, a test run going on under COVID, whereby this laboratory in Spiez, which is very close to Bern, had the duty to analyze COVID-19 and to make COVID-19, the pathogen information, available to all the other countries. There is so far no political oversight. There is absolutely no information about what truly is being done in this laboratory. And in Switzerland, we are very alarmed about the fact that WHO's prime #1 laboratory, reference laboratory, shall be the one in Spiez. Number 3, please, it's slide number 45. So just briefly touching this one, because there's too much evidence on it, and it was handled so well, among others, by the Peter McCullough Foundation and other excellent experts in the United States. The question whether WHO correctly assessed the risks from mRNA vaccines. the fact that it was a new method, process 1, process 2, and here we can only say it totally failed. Please, if you go through the next slides, we have so much evidence about the effects. The insiders know what studies I'm referring to, and to the total inequality of the quality of the several different manufacturing slots. So definitely never until today WHO acknowledged the risks that are associated with this modRNA product and technology. Please, slide 49. Did WHO communicate clearly, accurately, and honestly about these facts to the people? Let's have a look at just some homepage communication. Next slide. We see this promise that still is found today on the homepage of WHO, that these vaccines are as safe as other vaccines. Or next slide. With the clear demand, get vaccinated as soon as it is your turn. Or the next slide, which dates from 4th August 2023. COVID-19's vaccines are safe. All of this under the wider umbrella, next slide, of infodemics is part of a program by which WHO seems to perform the interests of the producers in presenting their products in a campaigning way that has nothing to do with the true qualities and risks of these substances. Next slide, 54. Did WHO allow open scientific debate and different views? Now, I skip this one because it is obvious to all that this must be a key question in every parliamentary and public reassessment of WHO's COVID-19 management. Next slide. Did WHO respect human rights and proportionality in its guidance? Here again, how can you possibly respect human rights if you grant people wrong information about these products, these modRNA-based products, deny them proper information, deny them informed consent, and in the same time you are pushing for a campaign to declare a COVID-19 crisis to be the most dangerous phenomenon since World War II. This is 57, slide 57, not a small issue. This is actually a violation of one of the most binding and most fundamentally important rules that were concluded and carved into stone as the consequences of World War II and of the actions of doctors like Dr. Mengele, who used helpless people in prisons as their guinea pigs. As a consequence of that, we have this Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 7, and most notably, this provision that no one shall be subjected to medical or scientific experimentation without his or her voluntary consent. This very provision applies even in times of public emergency, which threatens the life of the nation, and it is officially proclaimed. It cannot be set aside. I know that there are very few countries, maybe the United States, who have not adopted this international covenant, but in Europe, all of the countries have done so. And in Switzerland, it's even part of our constitution, Article 10, paragraph 3. So, now 7, the next one, did WHO remain independent from donors and sponsors? This has been a big topic here in these rooms many times. I just skip over the next slides, 59, 59, one back. You recall this number that more or less 80% of all funding for WHO originated from voluntary contributions. Voluntary contributions. And these 80% were these earmarked contributions that were given with a certain purpose by the donor. Here we have one significant example, next slide, which most of you know. This is insider trading. Most notably, here we see the purchase date of these shares by Mr. Bill Gates reaches back to August 2019, and the sale September 3, 2021, and he made a gain of 300, more or less 300 per share. This is pandemic profiteering, and all the more it is an insider dealing, as he himself contributed significantly in the public relations campaign for marketing this product in April 2020 and onwards in many international TV stations. Next slide. And the next one. Yes. So I need to come to an end with these many different aspects. Of course, the next question number 8, did WHO respect and safeguard all well-established safety rules and standards? Absolutely no. Did WHO, which is slide 64, internal oversight, audit and control systems work properly? Is there any kind of reassessment of after-action review performed by WHO? No. So what do we conclude from all of this? What is our suspicion 66? Our preliminary assessment. It is a preliminary assessment. It is not a judgment, but it's a starting point for all those who help and want to help to do a parliamentary reassessment of WHO. The suspicion is WHO did not assess the risks from SARS-CoV-2 correctly. WHO did not accurately investigate the origins of the pandemic. It does not understand where it came from, it does not want to know, and therefore it cannot prevent a similar event from happening again. WHO not at all assessed the risks from mRNA vaccines accurately and correctly. It did not at all communicate correctly and honestly about these decision-relevant factors. Next slide. WHO closed down any open scientific debate and differing views, to the great harm of scientific progress itself and to the great harm of fundamentals of democracy. 6, WHO not at all respects human rights and proportionality, as it allows for basically the population of the world to be wrongly informed and to be driven into an experimental treatment without any chance for an informed consent. 7, WHO is not at all independent from its donors and its sponsors, and to the contrary, it does their services. 8, WHO takes part in reducing well-established safety rules and safety standards instead of safeguarding these safety rules. And number 9, there is no effective oversight, no effective checks and balances whatsoever. So, what does it mean? That means, next slide, WHO is an institutional, systematic risk factor for public health of the entire world, for democracies, for fundamental human rights, for the free market, and for individual businesses. And as such, it should be treated. And what are the consequences of it? Slide 69. The consequences for lawmakers, we need to work with lawmakers together, like we have brave lawmakers here, MEP Anderson and MEP Monte. The consequences for lawmakers, next slide. Don't sign any WHO treaty, but make sure investigations are started. Member states should see themselves as a customer of WHO. Every customer must know whether the Secretariat, WHO Secretariat, has completed its mission and was or is acting with its constitutional framework. Did the Secretariat act in the interest of our people? This is the question that must be responded in an external audit of the WHO Secretariat. But also the World Health Assembly must ultimately come to this very same step. It is the supreme governing body of the WHO. It is responsible for supervising the WHO Secretariat and must ask the question, did the General Secretary complete his statutory mission under all applicable rules and standards, or did he do more harm to the people than good? And yes, the objective of such an external audit, of course, is an independent, rigorous and transparent audit of WHO's conduct and communication during the COVID-19 period. It must be based on the constitutional rules of WHO itself, on United Nations governance principles, on WHO's and United Nations internal control and risk rules, and on all the internationally recognized audit standards, in particular also measured by the international rules of human rights. Our role in it as ordinary citizens is to provide members of parliament with the information and give them our instruction, our incentive to go this path. Because it cannot be accepted that an organization with such a mission, a clear and simple mission, deviates so far from its constitutional mission that was established in 1948 with so much promise and so much hope. I thank you so much for your attention, and I embrace everybody who joins us on this path to bring in a clear after-action review and to establish this process of an external audit of WHO in order to ultimately say no to these new treaties. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that great speech, dear Philip. And our next keynote speaker is my dear friend, Dr. Beate Sibylle Pfeil. She is a German lawyer and independent researcher specializing in issues relating to national minorities in Europe, particularly in the context of constitutional, international, and European law. She has made a name for herself in her field through numerous lectures and seminal publications, including as co-author of a multi-volume handbook of ethnic groups. From 2008 to 2016, she was editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Minority Issues, EJM, and since 2019, she has been co-editor. She studied law at the University of Heidelberg, Germany, and passed her second state examination in Freiburg. In 2002, she received her doctorate in law, summa cum laude, from the University of Innsbruck, Austria. She conducted research at the South Tyrolean Institute for Ethnic Groups over 20 years, 17 of which as a deputy scientific director. From 2017 to 2023, she was the German member of the Committee of Experts of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, a Council of Europe treaty. From 2017 to 2022, she was vice chair of the European Center for Minority Issues in Flensburg, Germany. Her current focus is on human rights in the context of coronavirus measures, including WHO plans. Since the end of January, Dr. Pfeil has served as an expert member of the German Bundestag's Corona Review Commission for AfD Germany. Thank you so much, Dr. Beate Pfeil. Thank you so much, Beate, for speaking today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I realized you took the longer version of my bio. I was hoping for you to take the shorter one. But nevertheless, I can only echo the warm words of my esteemed colleague, Philipp Kruse, and say thank you to Christine Andersen and to MEP Bonde for hosting this event, and thank you to all of you for being here. So, after this very impressive presentation, I will focus on, like Philipp also did, on the human rights issue. It is my favorite issue since I've been studying law. And therefore, the first slide, please. Next one. I start with the benchmark before looking at the WHO. And the benchmark, of course, refers to human dignity, human rights, and freedom versus authoritarianism. What do we want? And what is the new era standing for? We are now moving. So, these intellectual and constitutional foundations of our liberal constitutional systems rightly count among the most valuable historical achievements of humankind. And I start with the concept of the human being in liberal legal systems. And in this context, I would like to quote a German constitutional scholar who just said many years ago, I quote, "The human rights of the first generation correspond to the human type of the Enlightenment, the individual who is conscious of himself, herself, oriented towards self-determination and personal responsibility, and embraces discussion and competition as a way of life." So I would like to stress again, self-determination of the individual and personal responsibility. The second core value of our liberal systems should be the concept of human dignity. I again quote the Constitutional Court of Germany. It was emphasized in 1956, quite shortly after World War II, which emphasized, "In the liberal democracy, human dignity is the supreme value. For the sake of his dignity, he must be guaranteed the greatest possible development of his personality." So these were ancient times in Germany. So what flows from these ideas and principles? Next slide, please. Now, just one back. Yes, we are still here. This means, in fact, that individual freedom is in principle unlimited, whereas state powers are in principle limited. Interventions by the state in the freedom of the individual therefore always require justification. They must be proportionate, that is, suitable, necessary, and appropriate for achieving a legitimate aim. So it is always a matter of balancing the freedom of one person with the freedom of another and with the resulting interests of the common good. So next slide, please. And this is a central message, I think. Liberal versus authoritarian systems. A liberal system protects individual freedoms and limits state power. An authoritarian system concentrates power and restricts the rights of the individual political at will, in other words, arbitrarily. So what about the WHO against this background? Just stay here. The WHO was founded in 1984 with the aim of attaining the highest possible level of health for all peoples. Since the revision of the international health regulations in 2005, which entered into force in 2007, the WHO has focused on public health emergencies of international concern, fakes, only since then. It seeks in particular to address the prevention of, preparedness for, protection against, and response to the international spread of diseases. My colleague has already pointed out that in times of alleged public health emergencies of international concern, the existence of such exceptional situations that go beyond normal patterns of infection must be demonstrated on the basis of scientific evidence. And the same refers to the recommendations issued by the Director General under reference to a confirmed fake, which involve restrictions on individual freedoms, must be proportionate in terms of containing the fake. That is, they must be suitable, necessary, and appropriate. This applies in particular to vaccinations which qualify as fundamental interference with the basic rights to life and physical integrity. So let's turn now to the WHO and its ideological concepts. I would like to start, next slide please, with the fundamental structural defects of the WHO. We've heard a lot about that already today. So I just repeat, structural defect number one is the uncontrollable powers of the Director General, being enabled just to declare fakes and then to issue recommendations with severe restrictions of human freedoms without any independent instance of control. And so let's think about that. Now we are hearing all these news about hantavirus. We should really be closely looking at that. I think all of us in here know that we have to be very careful with this new, maybe, I think, propaganda with regard to the maybe coming new pandemic. So, and what about the states? In practice, various factors lead most states, and this used to be the greatest surprise of my life, most states tended to align their national pandemic policies with the WHO without conducting independent reviews of fundamental rights. This amounts to a de facto surrender of sovereignty and can lead to far-reaching restrictions on fundamental rights, as has already occurred worldwide on a large scale. So, in this respect, I would like to turn to structural defect number one. And this is, no, let's see, I just lost. No, this is number two, dependence on donations. We already heard a lot about that. So I will turn to the structural defect number three. So next slide, please. Now there is something. I think we should stop with the slides. There is something out of order. So we have heard a lot about the WHO dependence on donations. And we should add the blatant lack of transparency. So the key areas of secrecy within the WHO concern, among other things, conflicts of interests involving WHO staff and experts, contracts with donors, for example, regarding the earmarked donations, contracts with the digital big tech sector, and the evaluation of health products for emergency use. All these areas of secrecy are, of course, very, very sensitive. The latter in particular gives, so the evaluation of health products for emergency use in particular gives the WHO decisive influence over regulatory authorities worldwide while maintaining secrecy. So my interim conclusion would be the combination of the Director General's de facto concentration of power and the WHO's dependence on voluntary donations creates the potential for massive external influence, for example, in the profit interests of private donors. A lack of transparency and public oversight further amplifies this effect. So, now let's turn to the WHO's ideological concepts. And if we take a closer look at these concepts, we realize that at the center of the new international health regulations and the pandemic treaty are the so-called relevant health products, particularly medicines and mRNA-based vaccines. The research, development, production, distribution, access, and financing of these products are to be regulated in detail. In this way, the WHO is establishing a global medical industrial complex without effective objective control mechanisms and without reliable guarantees of scientific evidence regarding the effectiveness and safety of these products. Ultimately, even the fundamental rights to life and physical integrity are at stake. The question cui bono can clearly be answered in favor of the manufacturers of these products who maintain close relationships with the WHO's most important donors. The circle closes. A lucrative profit model emerges. This is particularly evident in the pathogen access and benefit sharing system envisioned in the pandemic treaty, through which the future pandemic pathogens are to be identified and, above all, vaccines are to be developed in advance. These vaccines are especially inexpensive to manufacture and therefore are particularly profitable. My esteemed colleague Philipp Kruse has already addressed this topic in detail, including the sensitive topic of gain-of-function research. The ideological concepts developed within the WHO must be understood against the background of this medical industrial complex. So, concept number one refers to risk communication and the infodemic. The new IHR obligate contracting states to maintain official core capacities for risk communication, including combating misinformation and disinformation. To the extent that this provides for the deletion of alleged misinformation and disinformation by state authorities, it presupposes state institutions of truth and already violates at its core the fundamental right to freedom of expression. At the same time, this creates the possibility of violations of academic freedom, which is of central importance especially in the health sector. Not only the deletion of allegedly false information, but also the dissemination of allegedly correct information by official bodies forms part of the WHO's ideological toolkit. Under the pandemic treaty, risk communication is to be conducted, among other things, through information concerning the safety and effectiveness of health products, including vaccinations, with the implicit consequence that their effectiveness and safety may no longer be questioned. I just recently heard a German communications scholar within the German Bundestag who described health communication as involving not only cognitive but also emotional and social strategies, all aimed at securing acceptance of pandemic control measures and thereby reflecting a paternalistic understanding of the state. In other words, this lady delivered a perfect guide to state propaganda, and nobody protested. There was no cry within the German parliament, but it was a really perfect guide for propaganda. And this is a new form of science which is just being accepted, at least in Germany. So at this point, the boundary between legitimate risk communication and deliberate manipulation in the sense of totalitarian style state propaganda becomes blurred. The pandemic treaty likewise relies on behavioral steering by requiring research into factors affecting compliance and non-compliance with the health measures. All of this stands in diametrical opposition to the liberal conception of humanity rooted in the Enlightenment, which is based on the idea of individuals acting autonomously and responsibly. It also contradicts the fundamental right to freedom of expression, and there is also a threat to a de facto reconditioning from the responsible citizen to the obedient subject and the establishment of anti-liberty, paternalistic, totalitarian systems. So let's turn to concept number 2. There are now within the IHR new pseudo-fundamental rights. The new principle of equity resembles equality, but in fact refers to more to distributive justice, particularly with regard to the distribution of health products, including vaccines. Likewise, the equally moralizing principle of solidarity could be subsumed under a social strategy aimed at guiding behavior, as it may encourage the obedient compliance with prescribed containment measures, including vaccinations. It is concerning that these two social principles were added to the IHR alongside the liberal fundamental principles of dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, thereby creating the misleading impression of new fundamental rights. Finally, there is the so-called whole-of-society approach, which is also based on the moralizing notion that everyone should stick together in times of crisis. A particular problem arises when individuals or groups who, for example, legitimately question the existence of an emergency situation are subsequently excluded from society. Due to their moral character, all of the above-mentioned principles are suited to anti-libertarian behavioral control or to rallying people around a particular argument or moral stance that may involve the exclusion of dissenters. In this sense, the German scholar Ulrike Guerreau defines fascism. So I would just add one more ideological concept. We all know that it is the One Health principle. The idea that human health is connected to the health of animals and the environment, which appears plausible at the first glance. But there is also an acute risk of misuse here in the sense of an almost unlimited de facto expansion of WHO power under the pretext of protecting animals or the environment. And one more very important ideological concept refers to the militarization of health policy. And the esteemed colleagues Amrei Müller and Sylvia Behrendt have analyzed the WHO's global health security doctrine. In the end, and we had, for example, in the German parliament, we had some high-level soldiers being invited to the parliament, and they had no problem in just mixing up civil and military, civil obligations, thank you, Philip, civil and military obligations in times of crisis. And this is a very, very critical development because, you know, especially in Germany, the fathers and mothers of the Constitution really very consciously made a difference between civil and military matters. But all this consciousness seems to be fading. So, in the end, there is an acute risk of blurring the line between civilian and military affairs within individual countries, which in extreme cases could culminate in the use of military coercion against the population itself, hopefully not with regard to vaccines. And then we have another subject which was really brilliantly covered during the last session, the progressive digitalization, which means in the end an acute danger of establishing an excessive global surveillance system hostile to privacy and civil liberties, one that may evade national, constitutional and fundamental rights oversight. So the third part of my presentation refers to the WHO and its institutional interconnections. Through its extensive networks, which include numerous public and private institutions, the WHO already exerts considerable de facto influence today. This influence extends not only to national health policies, including the training of healthcare personnel, but also to areas such as agriculture and nutrition, One Health, laboratory standards and approval procedures for pharmaceuticals. So we have, for example, this framework called Global Health Emergency Corps, which serves as a comprehensive network concepts. Within the states, the GHEC concept is based on 3 levels. At the first level, there is a standing on-call emergency public health workforce. At the second level, there are so-called surge capacities. And most interesting is maybe the third level, involving connected leaders in key positions who link national, regional, and global coordination and decision-making pathways, which also includes units of the military and civil protection services. So the militarization is also visible in this context. Additionally, we have the so-called collaborating centers, more than 800 in 80 to 90 member states, which include research institutions, university institutes, and similar organizations formally designated by the WHO Director General officially to provide technical support for WHO programs. And if we look at this, we can imagine how much the ideology of the WHO is now influencing all, especially the scientific institutions all over the world. And if we look at of course, the US have, thanks to the US, withdrawn from WHO, but on the other hand, there are still lots of collaborating centers within the US, so that the WHO is still able to exert quite an influence over health policies also in this country. And third, there are the so-called WHO-listed authorities, which are national or supranational pharmaceutical regulatory agencies that have been classified as trustworthy regulatory authorities following WHO audits. For example, even still the US-American FDA, still an officially listed authority with regard to the regulation of vaccines. And this is the way the WHO tries to exert massive influence in this very, very sensitive area of regulating and accepting vaccines. Overall, this creates a layered WHO-centered ecosystem of formal authority, emergency coordination, technical systems, and policy networks with significant potential for external control without effective objective oversight mechanisms. Even in this way, the WHO can de facto restrict or override national sovereignty in the field of health. If one also takes into account Sayaghi's findings, he has published a lot about the connections between the WHO, Bill Gates, and Jeffrey Epstein, the following picture emerges. The combination of a strong financial dependence on earmarked contributions, the prominent role of the Gates Foundation, and the documented fund and network structures suggests a very large potential for influence and agenda setting by a small number of centrally connected individuals, especially Gates and maybe also indirectly Epstein. This potential is embedded in a web of governmental and private power structures and operates primarily through money, programs, and networks. And to conclude, after all, we must say that the WHO has moved far away from its original mission to protect the health of the people of the world. As a result of its structural deficits, further reinforced by ideological concepts embedded in its regulatory framework, with the medical industrial complex promoted by the WHO at its center, it endangers national sovereignty as well as individual freedoms, including the rights to life and bodily integrity worldwide. And we all know that mass human rights violation to a degree exceptional since World War II were the consequences of this policy. And this is why we are here now and again to join forces to counter this toxic trends, toxic trends, with our vision of a better world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Beate. Very well done. And an important contribution to the constitutional understanding of what we are discussing here regarding WHO. It is now my privilege to introduce our third keynote speaker of today and organizer of this event, Dr. Maria Hubner-Mock. Maria is an Austrian physician, mental health coach, and public speaker. She is the founder of the Austrian children's health organization We Show Our Faces. She also founded MEHA, Make Europe Healthy Again. Following severe disappointments with the US MAHA movement, she and her team have decided to dissolve MEHA and to start a new organization with the same mission, but without the previous association. Her strong focus on preventive medicine led her to study the gut microbiome as early as 2012, and after a pharmaculture seminar, she immediately recognized the vital connection between healthy soil and healthy food. By 2014, she was already working intensively with the red light therapy, non-infrared, a field that has become a global trend since. Dr. Maria Hubner-Mock holds diplomas in nutritional medicine, palliative care, and emergency medicine. She was one of the first doctors in Austria to publicly oppose the draconian COVID-19 measures and the overreach of the World Health Organization. When the Austrian government announced mandatory vaccinations in November 2021, she resigned from the Austrian Medical Board on her free will. Guided by her highly ethical standards and the Hippocratic Oath's principle of first do no harm, she chose to speak up against the dangers of modified mRNA vaccines. Since then, she has tirelessly raised awareness about the risks of modified and self-amplifying mRNA technologies. So far, she organized over a dozen international conferences and peaceful rallies in Austria, the United States, and Geneva, including one during the 77th World Health Assembly in June 2024. Well connected across the globe, Dr. Maria Hubner-Mock is a sought-after speaker at national and international events and a frequent guest on independent media outlets. Please welcome with me Dr. Maria Hubner-Mock.
Thank you for this kind introduction, dear Philip. Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to everybody who joins us in the live stream today. Thank you again to Christina Andersen and the ESN group. I can't thank you enough that you bring awareness to this important topic, the WHO and its plans. And for me, I picked a very interesting topic, and my dear friend Dr. Beate Pfeil spoke about it a little bit in the end of her amazing speech. So I will speak about the Epstein-Gates WHO axis, and I will do a deep dive for you about this, let's say, unusual connection. Imagine this. A convicted sex offender sits in his Manhattan townhouse and designs the financial architecture that will channel tens of billions of philanthropic dollars into global vaccine programs. The same man who orchestrated the trafficking of underage girls is the one who drafts the blueprints for a private global health fund anchored by the world's richest philanthropist, Bill Gates, and quietly connected to the World Health Organization. That is the Epstein-Gates WHO axis, documented in our dear friend Sayer Chi's investigative Substack series on the Epstein files. It is not conspiracy. It is the federal record, Bates numbered and publicly available at justice.gov/Epstein. Let me walk you through it in plain language. First, the money machine. In February 2011, JP Morgan's investment bank sent Epstein a detailed questionnaire. What are the sponsor's objectives? Who directs the investments? What technology platform? Epstein replied the same day. He designed a donor-advised fund, DAF, anchored by the Gates name, aimed at capturing the $60 billion sitting in the given pledge. He insisted on an offshore arm, especially for vaccines. He told Mary Erdos, JP Morgan's asset management CEO, exactly what language to use when pitching Gates. Additional money for vaccines. By August 31st, 2011, the 14-page Project Molecule version 13 presentation was ready. Governance board chaired by Melinda Gates, Susan Rice, Seth Berkley of Gavi, Anthony Lake of UNICEF. Budget slide, 150 million. Most of it for polio and meningitis vaccines, plus 20 million explicitly for the surveillance network in Pakistan, a philanthropic fund and an intelligent operation on the same page. Within a year, the Global Health Investment Fund launched with Gates Foundation sponsorship and JP Morgan execution. Later, it became the Global Health Investment Corporation, GHIC, which in 2021 signed a 10-year partnership with BARDA, the US government's biomedical defense agency, worth up to $500 million. A cabinet secretary was still issuing operational instructions to this vehicle in 2025. Epstein's name appears on none of the public documents. That was the plan. Second, the legal lock-in. On August 8, 2013, just weeks after Epstein's own skin cells were turned into iPS stem cell lines at Harvard Medical School, Bill Gates signed a 6-page agreement. It states that Gates specifically requested Epstein's involvement. It gave Epstein's Virgin Island companies full access to Gates Foundation confidential information at Epstein's sole discretion. It indemnified those companies against all past and future claims. And it contained a survival clause binding Gates' estate, hires, and personal representatives forever. That agreement is in the federal record. Third, the intelligence pipeline to the WHO. From March 2013 onward, Epstein ran a parallel channel through the International Peace Institute, IPI, and Terje Roth-Larsen. Field reports from Pakistan, Nigeria, and Afghanistan on polio eradication, ghost vaccination teams, diverted salaries, landed directly in Epstein's Gmail. The same inbox that received Gates Foundation itineraries, JP Morgan deal flow, and British Treasury briefings. In September 2015, the Rothschild Conference on Health and Security took place at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. Official participants included WHO Director General Margaret Chan, ICRC President Peter Maurer, and senior Gates Foundation officials. The conference was co-sponsored by the Edmond de Rothschild Foundations, the Gates Foundation, and the WHO. Epstein had helped design and fund it. The man the justice system had immunized from federal prosecution was now sitting at the center of the global pandemic preparedness table. Why does this matter? Because the architecture Epstein built was deliberately designed to be invisible. Private governance, no elected officials, offshore flexibility for vaccines, perpetual duration, arm's length profit mechanism, and an intelligence layer that moved faster than any government bureaucracy. The same inbox that handled Virginia Jeffries' flight itineraries also handled polio surveillance data and Gates Foundation strategy. CRG's research does not allege the Gates or WHO officials knew every detail of Epstein's crimes. What it proves, with Bates numbers, you can verify yourself, is that the architecture of impunity that protected Epstein's sex trafficking operation was the exact same architecture that shaped private influence over global vaccine policy and WHO adjacent health initiatives. A legislative body cannot legislate wisely without information. The Supreme Court once said, "Today we have the information. The federal record is public. The question is no longer, did this happen? The question is, what are we going to do about the building code that still stands?" We owe it to the victims, the girls whose names are in the archive, to demand full congressional hearings, complete disclosure of every surviving entity in the Epstein-Gates network, and structural reforms so that no private individual can ever again operate a parallel foreign policy and global health apparatus outside democratic oversight. The record is in our hands. The abyss stared back. Now it is time to stare it down together. I also prepared something very interesting for you, because I want to present a recent study published in the BMJ Global Health on October 28, 2025, titled, "Who's Leading WHO?" It's a quantitative analysis of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's grants to WHO 2000 until 2024, and the study was done by Jonathan Kennedy and Rudy Takrar. The paper asks a central question: does the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, BMGF, influence the World Health Organization through its massive funding? While BMGF is often praised for its generosity, the authors use hard data to examine exactly how and where this money is spent. The methods? The researchers built a complete data set by extracting every single grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's own website between 2000 and 2024. They coded each grant by amount, disease or health issue targeted, and type of activity. For example, vaccination, polio eradication, health system strengthening. The key findings? The numbers are striking. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave 640 grants totaling 5.5 billion to WHO. This equals 9.5% of WHO's total revenue between 2010 and 2023. Making BMGFs the organization's second largest funder after the United States. 82.6% of the money, that is 4.5 billion, went to infectious diseases. Of that, 58.9% of all Bill and Melinda Gates funding to WHO, 3.2 million, was earmarked for polio, even though polio now causes a tiny fraction of the global diseases burden. 53.3, that's 2.9 billion US dollars, supported vaccine programs and projects. In contrast, only a very small share went to non-communicable diseases, strengthening health systems, or addressing broader social determinants of health, areas that are central to WHO's own strategy and to global health equity. The conclusions and implications: the author's core message is clear. WHO's heavy reliance on earmarked voluntary contributions means that the priorities of big donors, not necessarily the greatest global health needs, determines what gets funded. In short, money talks, and right now it's largely speaking with a Gates Foundation accent. So to wrap up what I just presented, and we all know that it's all about repetition, and it's all about hearing facts and hearing important things that you can tell your health officials, that you can tell your friends, your family members. In 7 sentences, I will summarize again what I just pointed out to you. In 2011, Jeffrey Epstein designed a permanent, offshore-enabled, donor-advised fund architecture with J.P. Morgan, explicitly, especially for vaccines, anchored by the Gates name to capture Giving Pledge Capital, Project Molecule. On August 8, 2013, Bill Gates personally signed a 6-page legal agreement granting Epstein's Virgin Island entities full, self-determined access to all Gates Foundation and personal confidential information, with perpetual indemnification and the survival clause. Simultaneously, Epstein ran a parallel biological program arranging his own skin biopsy for iPS cell lines at Harvard, corresponding with George Church on human cloning and genome engineering and acquiring equity in CRISP startups. Through the International Peace Institute, he operated a real-time intelligence pipeline that routed polio field reports, ghost vaccination scandals, and pandemic preparedness data directly into the same inbox used for Gates Foundation strategy. The 2015 Rothschild Conference on Health and Security, co-sponsored by the Gates Foundation, WHO, and WEF, produced global pandemic governance recommendations with Epstein's Gmail on the distribution list at the same tier as WHO leadership. The vehicle Epstein designed became the Global Health Investment Corporation, GHIC, which secured a 10-year BARDA partnership worth up to $500 million in US taxpayer funds. Every claim is anchored to publicly accessible federal Bates numbers at justice.gov/Epstein. A convicted sex offender architected the unaccountable financial, biological, and intelligence infrastructure quietly occupied by the Gates Foundation and global health institutions for over a decade. Let that sink in. Thank you for your attention. And it's a great honor for us that we have international friends and allies from the United States of America here with us. 2 speakers that give additional speeches now, Reggie Littlejohn from the United States of America and John Leake, Vice President of the McCullough Foundation. And I want to start, as we have a lot of women on stage here, if okay, for our dear friend Reggie Littlejohn, with John Leake. And let me introduce John Leake to you. John Leake is an investigative journalist and author of 6 books. His most recent book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, which he co-authored with Dr. Peter McCullough, was a New York Times bestseller. He is the vice president of the McCullough Foundation that researches public health and safeguarding constitutional protections from government public health measures. Thank you, dear John, for being with us, and we're looking forward to your additional speech. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Maria, and a special thanks to Member of Parliament Anderson. You've always been on our fighting side since the beginning of this, so much gratitude to you. A lot of the remarks that have been made thus far, it would be redundant of me to make the same. I'm gratified that particularly Attorney Kruse has come to many of the same conclusions that we have at the McCullough Foundation, even though we've not been reading your papers. So it's an independent corroboration. I think, in summation, it's very clear. I think there's I'll give a sort of an English translation. I think there's a German expression, the man who pays the fiddler sets the tune. Mr. Gates, I think in the year, it was the biennial 2024-2025, the Gates Foundation gave $761 million to WHO, which made the Gates Foundation by far the largest donor. Mr. Gates has made no concealment of the fact that he believes public health is essentially equivalent to mass vaccination. There almost seemingly isn't a distinction in the man's mind between public health and mass vaccination. The other thing notable about Mr. Gates, and he said this at the World Economic Forum's Davos meeting in 2019, not only are vaccines great for public health, they're his greatest investment. He's made 20x on his vaccine investment. So there's not even any attempt to conceal that his relationship with the WHO, it would seem to align with his obsession with vaccines. Now, the other thing I'll say about Mr. Gates, not wanting to pick on him ad hominem, but in 1998, he was under investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice for Sherman antitrust violations. Ultimately, this matter was settled, but he was regarded as the most significant monopolist since John D. Rockefeller. Now, it's notable what John D. Rockefeller did after he developed the reputation as being one of the most hated men in America. He founded the Rockefeller Foundation. So what did Mr. Gates do after he was widely perceived to be an atrocious monopolist? He followed in Mr. Rockefeller's footsteps, and he founded the Gates Foundation. So I think Samuel Johnson once said that patriotism is the last refuge for scoundrels. Philanthropy may be competing with patriotism. Well, what I want to emphasize here, there was another remark that Mr. Kruse made. It completely corroborates my concern that Mr. Gates may in some way be using the WHO, specifically its field offices, as an intelligence agency for information about emerging infectious diseases. His fascinating large position in BioNTech at the end of August of 2019, that was just 19 days before the WHO and the World Bank issued a report titled "The World at Risk," illustrated with the icon of a coronavirus, warning that the risk of lethal infectious disease, respiratory infectious disease, whether accidentally or deliberately released, is possibly threatening the world. Now, the response, or the findings of the World at Risk report, was not we need to improve biosecurity, but we need to invest in vaccines. So how about improving biosecurity? So that's one of my observations that I would like to emphasize. Another observation is it has already been observed that the World Health Organization did an abysmal job of seriously examining the rather obvious evidence that SARS-CoV-2, one probably as well, I should add, but two emerged from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, there's a kind of black comic moment in all of this where the WHO puts together a so-called international team of investigators to go to Wuhan to get to the bottom of it. Now, who is one of the guys that was, inspector on the spot in Wuhan? But Peter Daszak at EcoHealth Alliance, who since 2013, his group of investigators had been working with Shangji Li at the Wuhan Institute of Virology to make bat SARS coronaviruses deliberately transmissible to humans. So it's like the LAPD, this is a little bit crass perhaps, but in my view, it's like the LAPD sending Charles Manson to investigate the Sharon Tate murder. I hope this isn't a little too bold for me to say, but anyway, it seems in the same spirit. So why was Peter Daszak sent to investigate this, and why, amongst all of the possibilities, that this long, beside-the-point report that he issued, of all the possible vectors for this emergence, he claimed that lab escape was extremely unlikely. This flies in the face of the documentation that he, Peter Daszak, Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Sheng-Ji Li, they themselves have an academic paper trail directly indicating that the most likely origin was from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, surprise, surprise, 2 miles from where the first cases emerged. And I should add, about 1,000 miles from the nearest bat caves in the tropical region of China. The other thing that I wanted to point out, the WHO pandemic agreement, I mean, I think this was already mentioned perhaps. I mean, it really privileges the emergency use authorization of new vaccine products. And I think this is kind of the stamp of approval. There's a novel experimental vaccine. The WHO puts its stamp. We need to fast track this in all of these different jurisdictions. So this should be very carefully looked at. I wanted to conclude, and this was expressly on the request of my superior at the McCullough Foundation, Dr. Peter McCullough. He has been fascinated and intrigued by this hantavirus outbreak on board this Dutch-flagged ship, the MV Hondius. And what we have been discovering in the last few weeks is that a lot of what the WHO is telling us about this is not plausible. There is one paper that was published in 1998, Padula et al., and this is the sole paper that is being referenced as evidence of human-to-human spread. We did an analysis of the paper. It's extremely controversial. Many experts in the field have called Padula et al.'s paper into question as to whether there is any human-to-human spread. But you would never know that from what is now being pronounced in the international media. And I think that we need to be paying very close attention to this. We are being given the impression that this is most likely human-to-human spread. We need this global regime of PCR testing, various possible measures are being foreshadowed that they may be coming our way once again in Europe. The other thing is, why is this vessel being sent to Rotterdam? It seems very strange that this has been handled in every respect in the way it was. The other thing that we noticed, there are no references in any of the reporting on this to specific rodent control logs on board this vessel. It seems to me it's the first thing the captain would refer to is, look at my rodent control logs. I'm not saying we've proven this, but this omission raises the suspicion that there's something in the log saying, well, we took these measures in response to some evidence of rodent activity on board. That would be the more plausible thing that needs to be clarified, but you notice very vague talk about rodent control. The vessel in particular had been in this Argentine port since November of last year with some brief excursions. I would want an investigator to look very, very closely at the provisioning of the vessel when it was in that port. The other thing I'll say about this is in 2022, Toledo et al. Wrote about this purported human-to-human transmission. The final conclusion of the paper was the balance of evidence does not, and this is a systemic review of all of the literature, does not support the claim of human-to-human transmission. So that is all to say the world needs to be very, very vigilant about what the WHO and its patrons are telling us about this latest so-called public health emergency. I'm John Leake. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker, Reggie Littlejohn, she also came all the way from the United States of America. She is the founder and president of Anti-Globalist International, an alliance to expose and oppose the encroachment of Chinese-style global governance. Ms. Littlejohn is co-founder of the Sovereignty Coalition, a non-partisan group determined to protect and defend U.S. national sovereignty and personal medical freedom against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, combating coercive population control in China. An attorney from the United States, Ms. Littlejohn is graduate of Yale Law School. Ms. Littlejohn has testified 8 times at the United States Congress. She has delivered addresses, briefings, and remarks at the European, the British, the Irish, Canadian, Estonian parliaments, Den Haag, United Nations, State Department, White House, the Israeli Knesset, and the Vatican. She has been featured in written, radio, and internet TV pieces by BBC, CNN, CBN, C-SPAN, Fox News, the Ingraham Angle, The American Thinker, Breitbart, Voice of America, and numerous other news outlets. Thank you for giving us an additional insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you especially to MEP Christine Anderson, without whom none of these events would have happened. You really have opened the door to this discussion in the European Parliament and to all of Europe and really to all of the world. And I just got news that the Epoch Times and NTD TV are live streaming this event. So this is going all over the world. Thank you also to the ESN group and to MEP Bonti for hosting this event. All right, so does the passage of the WHO pandemic agreement on May 20th of 2025 create the framework to usher in a new era of globalist control masquerading as healthcare? Number one, the treaty represents a threat to national sovereignty and personal medical freedom by establishing an unelected, unaccountable globalist organization at the helm of international healthcare policy and implementation, quote, recognizing that the World Health Organization is the directing and coordinating authority in international health work. The treaty further expands the WHO's purview not only to exercising its authority during actual pandemics, but also during potential pandemics and during times between pandemics. In other words, at all times, in perpetuity. Further, nations are expected to amend their domestic legal and regulatory frameworks in alignment with the treaty, further eroding national sovereignty. Number two, censorship. The treaty requires nations to, quote, prevent misinformation and disinformation. That's in the preamble at page 6. Misinformation and disinformation are not defined in the treaty, but we can discern what they are from the WHO's past behavior. And as MEP Bonti pointed out, there was a tweet from the WHO in January 2021, no human-to-human transmission of COVID-19 per Beijing. So if you said, no, there is human-to-human transmission, even though that statement is true, that would be called misinformation and disinformation. Not to be censored afterwards, but to be prevented before. So that's really chilling. How are they going to prevent it before it comes out? Restricting access to accurate data further subverts national sovereignty and personal medical freedom. How can nations or individuals make sovereign decisions over their medical affairs if they cannot access accurate information? Number three, digital IDs. The treaty requires nations to develop, quote, national health information systems utilizing, quote, international data standards for interoperability. Now, I'm not going to, there was a brilliant event here at the European Parliament just a couple months ago about digital IDs and the connection to the World Health Organization. please watch that. I'm not going to rehash all of that here, but what I will say is that even though the digital IDs are not specifically mentioned in the pandemic treaty, they are, the standards for them are set forth in the international health regulations, and these standards conform the digital infrastructure that could give rise to a Chinese-style social credit system. And if you want more information on that, watch the previous wonderful event here in the same room a couple months ago. One Health. Now, the One Health approach recognizes that the health of people is interconnected with animal health and the environment, which, as was mentioned, sounds plausible, but this interconnectedness can lead to surveillance and control of every aspect of life on Earth. An article in The Lancet entitled, quote, "One Health, a Call for Ecological Equity," states, quote, "The consequences of this thinking entail a subtle but quite revolutionary shift of perspective. All life is equal and of equal concern." So are human lives really equal and of equal concern to the lives of cockroaches and crabgrass? Next, the expedited approval of vaccines. The treaty requires nations to, quote, "strengthen domestic regulations in order to ensure that they have, quote, legal, financial, and administrative frameworks necessary to fast-track the approval of vaccines and other medications. This will potentially short-circuit important safety and testing protocols." Next, the pathogen access and benefit sharing system. So we have pathogen access and we have benefit sharing. The pathogen access part of this is basically that the World Health Organization is requiring countries, to find if they find a pathogen, go out into your swamp, go out into your sewer system, go out into your jungle and find pathogens. And don't eradicate them. Don't quarantine them. No, send them to the World Health Organization, which will farm them out to labs all over the world, ostensibly for the purpose of developing vaccines and therapeutics. But obviously, this is going to greatly increase the chances of lab leaks. So to the extent that a lab leak caused COVID-19, we need to be very concerned about lab leaks. And also, there's no restriction on which countries are going to get these pathogens, including countries who are enemies of each other. So it's going to increase the chances of bioterrorist attacks. It's going to greatly enrich big pharma. It could lead to chronic lockdowns. And for those countries that are so inclined, for them to be indefinitely suspending our constitutional rights and human rights. Now, I will mention some things. My esteemed colleague Philip Kruse mentioned the Spiez Lab in Switzerland. And I would say this, it's doing the same thing. It's to create a fast and reliable system for sharing materials that could cause epidemics and pandemics. So it's the same thing as the PAB system, but it was started years before. The PAB system hasn't even been passed yet. It may never get passed. I hope it never gets passed. The negotiations have been extended. But that didn't stop the World Health Organization from just founding this Spiez Lab that does the exact same thing as the PABS system. So my question is, under what authority is the Spiez Lab operating? And is the World Health Organization simply advancing the illusion that member states will determine how PABS will be governed through this annex that hasn't passed yet, when in reality, the WHO will do whatever it pleases, ultra vires, regardless of any treaty or annex? So another very esteemed colleague, Sylvia Behrendt, has done a very, very excellent analysis of the PAB system, and was involved with the government of Slovakia, which has issued a public announcement stating in pertinent part, quote, the delegation of the Slovak Republic will strongly insist that the PABS Annex include explicit, legally binding, and enforceable biosecurity and biosafety safeguards addressing the systematic use of dual-use and gain-of-function research. The delegation of the Slovak Republic will emphasize that without the aforementioned fundamental corrections, the PABS system cannot be adopted. And this, again, it's going to, there is nothing in the PABS Annex that restricts gain-of-function research. So that's what this is addressing. It just says applicable international law. Well, under applicable international law at this moment, there's gain-of-function research happening all over the world. And this is just going to multiply it just exponentially. So an urgent legal notice regarding the PABS system issued by the Global Health Responsibility Agency concludes, quote, the present PABS design is institutionally and legally indefensible. Now, people have said that they feel that the World Health Organization has veered off of its original mission and that it has become corrupt. I mean, there's no doubt that it's corrupt. But I wonder whether it really has veered off its original mission. I just want to give for your consideration this quote from the first director of the World Health Organization. His name was Brock Chisholm, the first Director General of the World Health Organization. He once stated, quote, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. And Chisholm was a psychiatrist, so I shiver to think how he was going to remove this from the minds of men, what his idea was. But he said the quiet part out loud. If to achieve world government was the goal of the first Director General of the World Health Organization, then it would be naive of us to believe that our national sovereignty and personal freedom are not at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leek and Mrs. Littlejohn, for sharing your valuable and very interesting insights also about the hantavirus, which is quite an actual topic. So, ladies and gentlemen, some closing reflections. Today we've heard 5 voices that are too rarely given a microphone here in Brussels. Experts in law, experts in jurisprudence, experts in medicine, with one shared diagnosis that something has gone fundamentally wrong with the way global health is being governed, and that the institution at the center of it is not answering the questions citizens that have every right to ask. Some thoughts, first of all, this is not a debate about health, it's a debate about power, about who is making decisions, on what basis, on whose oversight. When an international organization seeks to expand its authority over national policy through binding instruments, through emergency declarations, through frameworks that bypass parliaments, then this is no longer a technical conversation among experts. Secondly, yes, transparency. Transparency is an absolute condition. An organization funded overwhelmingly by earmarked private money, governed by structures most people could even not name, proposing instruments that most parliaments have not seriously debated about. Yes, such an organization cannot expect the trust it demands. And trust is earned through scrutiny, not protected from it. And the response to legitimate questions cannot be to label the questioners as fringe, as conspirational, as anti-science. And that reflects itself, it's a symptom of an institution that has lost its democratic moorings. And third, and most importantly, sovereignty, because sovereignty matters as a simple, hard-won principle that the people who live with the consequences of a decision should have a meaningful voice in making it. A pandemic agreement, an amendment to the international health regulations, a global health framework, mandatory vaccines. These are not neutral things. They shape how our hospitals are run, what our doctors may prescribe, what our citizens may refuse or may not. To sign such instruments without genuine parliamentary debate, without informed public consent, is to hollow our democracy in the name of expertise. We are not here today because we oppose international cooperation, but we are here today because we believe international cooperation is too important to be left unaccountable. And I want to thank Christine for taking the lead in this debate, and also to all of our speakers for their courage. And courage because in this debate, asking the obvious question still requires it. And I want to thank you, the audience as well, for being willing to listen, to think, and to agree and to disagree. The work does not end when this conference ends. It begins in our parliaments, in our communities, in the questions we keep asking until we finally, hopefully, get the answers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your patience. That was a lot of information that we heard, and you might justifiably so ask yourself, why should I even care? I mean, what do I care what the WHO does? Or, you know, they're doing the right thing. I mean, they're experts, right? Well, let me start out by asking you a question. Had you not watched TV during the COVID pandemic, would you have even noticed that there was a pandemic going on? I think you know the answer to that question. So again, I'm asking you, turn off your television set. It's dumbing you down. But let me try all that information that we have heard today, and you're asking yourself, why should I even care? Let me try to put that into perspective, why you absolutely have to care about these matters. Because ultimately, we are talking about freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And our lawmakers, our elected representatives, they're attacking it from every angle they can. Let me take you back briefly to the year 2009. Remember the swine flu? They were trying this before. They tried this before in 2009. It didn't work back then. I mean, they had it all going, you know, all the media was reporting about it. They had a vaccine going, you know, in no time whatsoever. The German government, they bought like 50 million doses, but it didn't work back then. The people were not hyperventilating. There was no alarm. They were not alarmed in any way. Why? Well, that's what they learned the last time. The public media was not on board. There was, you know, talk shows, but there were experts from both sides. You know, the one said, yeah, vaccine is a good idea. The other said, nah, I don't know. It hasn't even been tested or anything like that. So it didn't work. And the people were, after a few days, yeah, like whatever, you know, shove your swine flu. It's not a big deal at all. And now, fast forward to 2020. And the years before specifically, remember all of those global simulation games? They had learned their lesson. They got the public media on board. They were part of the pandemic game plans. So all the media, all you heard was, oh my God, we're all going to die. And you have to take an mRNA injection, so you will not die. In the end, it was like, well, you know, you take the mRNA injection. First it was, you don't get sick if you take it. Then it was like, well, you kind of do get sick, but not as bad as the others. And then it was like, well, yeah, you do get sick, like really bad, but you're not going to die. And then it was like, well, you might even die, but at least you get to go to heaven. That was pretty much, you know, their narrative. So anyhow, they learned their lesson. They got the public media on board, and it worked beautifully. Well, for the most part. Because in the end, it didn't work. Because now there was this other thing that was called social media. And they did not have control of that. Well, they tried. And remember, you know, it's kind of like how they crucify Elon Musk now, that billionaire, you know, that is not censoring social media. And he's taken over, you know, social media and controlling public opinion. Well, they didn't have a problem with a billionaire controlling public opinion when it was Mark Zuckerberg. It was all good then, right? Because he did their bidding. Anyhow, so they did not have control or not total control over social media. And in this house, but they worked on that. In this house, we had a special committee. It was called on the COVID, and the title was COVID Lessons Learned. But they were not looking at where they curbed fundamental rights, undermined democracy, and, you know, kind of like locked up the entire citizens in the state. That's not the mistakes they were trying to look at or trying to find out. What they were looking at is, where did we fail to just get anybody to do what we tell them to do, and take the mRNA injection when we tell them to take them, and take even the seventh or eighth or ninth shot. That's what they were trying to figure out. And they figured it out. And here are the remedies. Number one, they came up with the DSA, the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act pretty much empowers the government to censor social media, because people are not allowed to know, or supposed to know, that the virus did in fact come from a lab. Remember that whole discussion, which never took place because it was just canceled? Well, now we know it did come from a lab, and it was gain of functioning. And yes, Mr. Leek already spoke about that. They made it possible for that virus to be transmissible from human to human. It wasn't like that before. They worked on it to make that happen, but people were not allowed to talk about it. Okay, came up with the Digital Services Act. They want to censor social media so that people will not get to the truth. Next thing we're talking about is chat control. You might have heard of it, but that is only supposed to protect children from sexual abuse. And they have this, you know, kind of line going now. Oh, you are against chat control? That must mean you are for sexual abuse of children, which is completely nonsense. Because chat control is not going to protect children. It's only going to enable the government to know everything about you, and that's what they want. They want to snoop around in your very private family conversations. Whatever you are doing online, they want to know. They want to know who the dissidents are. That's what they're trying to find out. Now they're not coming and rounding you up. No, they have other instruments. So they also figured out, gosh, people lost trust in the institutions, as they call it, the government and parliaments and institution. Their fix for that is the European Democracy Shield. That's what they came up with. And once again, they're telling the people, we want to protect our democracy. Notice they're calling it our democracy. Our democracy is a completely different concept from democracy, how it was intended to be in the first place. Their, or our democracy is, kind of like a system where they stay in power and dictate to you what you can see, what you can say, and what you can do. That's the concept of our democracy. Anyhow, the European Democracy Shield is pretty much a tool that once again enables government to take control and pretty much to erect a surveillance state. And the way they go about doing it is kind of like they want to pass a certain piece of legislation, which they just know the people will reject because it once again curbs their fundamental rights. So they want to pass it anyway. How do they go about doing it? Well, they create an emergency, like the COVID pandemic, I have to say. So then people will just go along with whatever it is. You might also remember 9/11 back then. And I'm not going to get into the whole shebang about 9/11. But the Patriot Act, you might remember that, which poked serious holes into the American US Constitution, that was ready. That legislation was ready and done to go with. All they needed was pretty much an incident so they could justifiably, plausibly implement it, which they have. A few weeks ago, we had a big scandal in Germany, the Colin Fernandez, whatever scandal. She is not even a B celebrity. She's like, I don't know, like a C-rated, if not worse. I'd never even heard of that actress before. Colin Fernandez. So anyhow, she claimed her ex-husband spread sexualized deepfakes about her on social media. And it was on the media for days and days, no end. Everyone was weighing in, every politician, all whatever unions you had, everyone. The public debate was totally dominated by this poor woman who had been digitally violated by her ex-husband. And it turned out none of it was true. It was a lie. But why did they do that? Why was it such big news? Yeah, they want to introduce clear names on social media. So you are supposed to be required to give your real name now. And how do you prove that that is actually your real name? Bingo. They have a requirement, or want to introduce a requirement, to submit your ID before you open a social media account. Are you getting it yet, what they're trying to do? They are trying to erect the perfect surveillance police state. It has all the hallmarks of all of it. So whatever they're doing with WHO, it's just a tiny little piece of their sinister, devilish agenda. And this is what I've been trying to get across to you, the people, for, I don't know, years now. When will you finally wake up? And when will you finally come to the conclusion that your government is not looking out for your best interest? And I said it before, and I will repeat myself today. In the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political or clerical elite that was truly and genuinely concerned with the well-being of regular people. What makes you think that it is any different today? Stop. Stop giving your government, your elected representatives, the benefit of the doubt. They are not looking out for your best interest. And the elected representatives that are not looking out for your best interest, you need to run them out of the parliaments. Don't vote for them ever again. And they need to know that you will not support them anymore. Please, if you don't do it for yourselves, then do it for your children, because your children deserve better than what we are subjected to at the moment. Do it for your children, because always remember, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law was a gift given to us by our parents and by our grandparents. We have no right to deprive our children of that gift. Please do it for your children. Freedom, democracy, and the rule of law deserve defending on an everyday basis. And unless you're prepared to fight for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, it will be gone one day. And I will fight for as long as I live, and I hope you will do the same. Thank you so much. Thank you. This pretty much, unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A anymore. This will conclude our conference, but please stick around. We have some refreshments, and let's just mingle and, get into private conversations. I'm pretty sure there is tons of questions that still need answering. Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.